Hey guys, this is Patrick Carl Sadamoon. You might know me as the guy with the most IM medals in the world, or something like that. I'm also the CGO of Fnatic, and you're watching Duncan 4 in Shield's YouTube channel. Pleasure being here.
Right, this is going to be another episode of my feature, Esports Mount Rushmore. And as I have to say every time, because unfortunately the title, while being straight fire, can be misleading, this is not, I repeat, not seangares 4 best players ever to play in Counter-Strike. Because if you think that, and by the way, if you skip this intro, good luck, because you're in for some shocks. That's all I'm going to say. No, this is, like I do with a lot of people, you know, I've decided to make a twist each time to it. So in this particular scenario, since you are a well-known in-game leader and someone's been in-game leader the entire time in CSGO, I thought, well, I mean, technically there was that brief period where Semphis thought he could in-game lead, but we don't talk about that. That never happened. So better time, Sean. So we're going to make the twist for you. Obviously, your 4 in-game leaders. And again, it doesn't have to be 4 best. It's like 4, like I make it very vague. I mean, it's 4 like iconic ones or 4 that, you know, was significant to you in some way. You thought there was something interesting about them or something appealed to you or you admired something. I think there's a lot of ways you can go with it because essentially it's just kind of like the equivalent of if you get a director in a movie and you're like, what are your 4 favorite movies? You know, he doesn't have to pick the 4 best. You can pick in any movie he wants. So let's start it out then. As usual, don't tell us all 4. Just start with the first one. And just as a little note, because I find this is better, it's usually better to sort of put like the weirdest one at the end, just to make it like, what the fuck? But don't do that at the beginning. So what are we going to start with? Who are we going to start with before here?
Well, we have to start with Fallen, because everyone knows I'm going to choose Fallen. So it's kind of like I have to start with him. He's just such an influential leader in my eyes. Like, it shaped the way I called in CS. I remember playing against him at 1.6, so it goes back a long ways.
Okay, so let me ask you this then. So obviously, we all only really got to know about Fallen, the in-game leader, in 2015 when he came back, and he had that initially the Kaboom team and then Keyed Stars, and then we all know like the transition till eventually they became amazing when they had Coldzera and Taco and FNX. But what a lot of people will forget, Sean, and this is why it's interesting that you picked this guy, is the breakout game for Fallen in CSGO was at a tournament called MLG X Games Aspen. And at this tournament, the upset that they got was versus this team called Cloud9, and it was on a map called Mirage. And obviously, people will know this was the period where at this tournament, and then they actually had a great game against Fnatic at that clutch cut. It was actually Mirage that put them on the map. This was an upset. So you said you played against him in 1.6. He was just an AWPer in 1.6. You know, like I never saw any kind of signs that he was going to be this sort of person. Was it, when you remember that team back then, the one I'm talking about who played you when they were Kaboom, they weren't most of the players now, you know, like, I mean, they were a much worse team. No one expected anything from them. What impressed you about this guy when he came on the scene as an in-game leader?
Yeah, so like you said, when he didn't used to be an in-game leader, in 1.6 he was known as this like really fast, snappy AWPer. I guess very similar to Simple currently. Like he was very flicky, like he never had his crosshair like in perfect spots. He'd just flick all over the place. It looked like he had like 10 sensitivity. He was incredible when you watch him 1.6. So coming into CSGO, I expected more of that, but I don't even think he was the AWP player on his team on that iteration of Kaboom. I think it was like ZQK or something like that. But that team was very execute based. Like they did a lot of really cool things on Mirage back then, like 5 smoke execs into the A bomb site, which if you were to do today, honestly, you'd probably get slaughtered. But
they basically invented that though, right?
Yeah, they really took the whole execute game to like the next level. It was almost like an existence type of style. And the thing I respect about Fallen is that he's changed so much since those early days. You know, like I actually didn't even remember that match until you just brought it up. But yeah, that style of CS that beat our version of Cloud9 then was so shocking to play against. Like, and you can tell ask anyone that played at that tournament. The things they were doing were super innovative, actually. And they've continued to have those kind of innovations, which is really cool.
So obviously, in the latter days, people are mainly going to know Fallen from the good Luminosity lineup and then SK Gaming, basically this similar core, where they had all this success, like unbelievable level of success and consistency. But tying it into that first point that we made there, there's a different style of play though, right? Now it wasn't just like pure executes and like everything's like utility usage. How do you describe like the way this classic core played?
Like the originally how'd they play? I'm
the
sorry.
one that has like Taco and FNX and then to Phelps and how would you say what was it? How does his style change? Because again, actually, most in-game leaders have the one style and then they tend to it's that way the whole time. But as you say, it was a very different style he had in the past. So what was the modern day Fallen like?
Yeah, so that kind of happened when FNX came into the team, and honestly, I always had a really easy time reading SK. Back then, LG, and before that, I guess Kaboom. In scrims and practice, we didn't really run into them much in tournaments, to be honest, when I was on Cloud9. But I always liked the fact that I always relied on Fallen to call this like very strategic style of CS. So when FNX joined the team, he brought this loose style to back then LG, where basically like if they were doing a default, they would then have freedoms to work off of picks, or if they sensed the setup, do like small micro hits of 2 or 3 people. Whereas before that, before FNX, they were doing like 5-man executes or 4-1 executes all the time. And it was so easy to read. So FNX brought this new style of CS that really only Fnatic and maybe Envious were running properly at the time. Maybe Navi to an extent. So that was really like a huge part of their success, in my opinion, was that change of style.
What would you say to this then? So as someone who's an in-game leader yourself, right, I noticed that a lot of fans and even some analysts will often like recommend this style, like, oh, you should give your players a bit more freedom, and they'll say like things that sound great on paper, like every player should just know what he's supposed to do and be able to like be interchangeable. Like that all sounds great if you have the players to do it, but that's pretty fucking hard, right? There's a reason why people have a tactic and why someone has a set role in it, so you can kind of limit the things that can go wrong in a way, right? So what would you say to that? Is it tough to give people freedom like that?
Yeah, it's ridiculously hard to just say, oh yeah, I'm giving you freedom to do whatever you want. Because then, you have 5 parts that are literally thinking independently and can do whatever they want. Or maybe you say, okay, 2 or 3 people can do that. Well, it's hard to read their mind and what they're going to do in the next 5 seconds when they're playing reactively to everything that they see. I mean, you can't think exactly how they think, so to give players that kind of freedom and actually have success is extremely difficult. It takes a lot of theoretical discussions about like what you're going to do when X happens. And even though there are a lot of players with tons of freedoms, like you'll see Simple say he has a lot of freedom, or Electronic recently said he has a lot of freedom. Star players say this all the time, but they only have freedom in the confines of what they do on a map, right? Like you won't see Simple, just decide, oh, this round I'm going to go apps on Inferno with my AWP, or I'm going to go here or there. Now, he typically will be in the same, 3 spots on every map, and he'll have like micro things that he likes to do differently, and his team knows how to work off of those things. So yeah, it's like an illusion of freedom. He does have freedom to do more than the other players on his team, but it's not like the leash is completely off of him, and that's what a lot of fans don't understand when they say that statement.
Okay. Well, one thing I think we can tie into that is, I remember when they were coming into ESL 1 Cologne 2016 was the second major, which is when it was the first tournament where they were actually SK Gaming, and the one where they were super dominant. It was actually like the end of them being like the best team for sure. They said actually before that tournament, it was like a really controversial statement when they said it, because I think everyone was shocked. They said in an interview something crazy like that before the major, they'd only practiced, like they scrimmed for 2 hours and then they would do 4 hours of theory. Like they would literally, I assume, be literally like a whiteboard or something. I mean, again, from what I know about pro players, good luck getting pro players to do 4 hours of theory. But if you could, it makes a lot of sense as to why you could have this style, right?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to be on a team like that, but that's insane that actually, the players outside of the in-game leader and the coach are actually okay with doing all that, because it has been so hard to get players to do that kind of stuff in the past. And that's changed, honestly, since, esports has gone way more mainstream professional. You see, like now all these top tier teams have sports psychologists and coaches and analysts, and their practice flow has it's regimented really well. So they do like certain things at certain times, and they're almost forced to do things the right way now, a lot of these top teams. But yeah, if they were doing that, that's like awesome. I remember reading that as well, and I thought, is that real? There's no way that's real.
Here's the thing, if it isn't, even if it was just like 1 hour, it is a good way to make like every other in-game leader like shit themselves. Like, what the fuck they do for us? And they're like, we just played scrims. Like,
yeah, I remember reading that. Like, holy shit, dude, we'll never stand a chance against these guys.
Right, okay, what about this then? So another thing that they're kind of infamous in the NA scene for is that obviously they did move to NA from Brazil very early on, and they had that like team house there, and so they've technically been in the NA region the whole time since then. And one of the things, okay, that I can tie into your career is if you remember way back in the day, in the early days of CSGO, the complaint you guys always used to tell me at every LAN was like, there's only iBuy Power and us, like, if we don't practice them and they don't practice us properly, you know, there's no real practice. And then obviously, you know, eventually we got more teams, but we hear even to this day, NA teams go to Europe, they boot camp for a week, and they always say every time in interviews, oh, the practice is so much better here. So here's the question, right? What are Fallen's teams like to play in practice in NA? Do they practice somehow differently to the NA teams? Because obviously they've remained like at times the best team in the world, even though in theory they were in, to some degree, an inferior practice environment. What would you say?
Yeah, I think it's literally exactly what they said in that interview, right? Where they put more time into their prep work as opposed to playing these shitty NA teams that aren't giving them quality practice. Because, NA teams just find themselves in the same cycle over and over. And they're finally kind of getting themselves out of it with the upper echelon of EPL and the ECS League. They actually are playing proper CS at the top, but that's because they were forced to because of teams like SK and when Immortals was here, and then Cloud9 stepping up, Liquid stepping up. So if you want to compete with those four teams and make the playoffs for these big leagues and make your salary worth it, you have to be able to beat them. In order to be able to beat them, you have to be playing proper Counter-Strike. So it's like the lower part of EPL and ECS was almost forced to start playing decent CS. So that's how I think Fallen did this, though, is he put a lot of time out of, scrims and matches and just talking about things, like if we get this kill on Mirage, say like we're doing like a default and we kill the cat guy playing super aggressive, what does that mean? Like where are they going to rotate to? Well, probably the window guy is going to go back to B. The connector guy is going to float towards jungle. A is going to be really easy to take. The A guy might play aggressive, so be a little bit ready for that. And everyone understands then what that 5v4 means. And they did that across every map, it felt like. For every spot, for every pick, they understood where the rotations would be happening. And in my eyes, I've said this like a dozen millions of times before, I feel like at this point, that rotations are the key to Counter-Strike at the pro level, and understanding them and how to manipulate them is what's going to make you succeed if you're an in-game leader. And I think that's why you see teams like Astralis right now just dominating the scene, because they abuse what would be standard rotations on both halves of maps. Like on CT, they basically try to convince you that they're playing long A, but they're actually playing catwalk because they know that you're going to rotate off of long towards cat. Like they're just constantly playing these mind games based on rotations. And I think Fallen did a really good job of teaching his team rotations. And maybe it was coldzera as well. I heard coldzera had a large influence in that team as far as strategically. So maybe when coldzera entered the team, they learned even more. I don't know. But it was crazy. Their growth over that year was ridiculous.
Well, the funny thing is, I actually heard a story. I forget if it was actually from SK. I think it might have been maybe when I had Zeus on a podcast or something. But I heard a story which sounded amazing along these lines, which is that apparently, because I said a similar question, like, well, how did you get to number one and then stay number one while you were playing against NA teams who had a rep for not being good practice? And obviously your team's better than them anyway. And they told me something ridiculous, like, oh, well, what we do is, because we know like the game won't be great practice and like the team probably won't beat us, we try to play as if it was a LAN match. And so we try to not do anything that we wouldn't get away with in a LAN match. Now, that's another thing, Sean, that to a naive observer just sounds like, hey, good idea. But it's like, even though that's not necessarily directly what Fallen's doing, like, if you can convince your team to do that, just hats off. Like, that's unreal, isn't it? Yeah.
No, it's actually
These
true,
aren't easy things to convince people to do, right? Like, don't just try and stomp them in the scrim, play it properly. That's so tough.
Yeah, it's actually so hard, especially when you think about the fact that, it's not like a LAN where you're going to like once every 3 months. No, these players are signing on 5-6 days a week, to play these scrims for hours and hours, all of those days. Like to act like they're going to treat all of those matches like LAN matches and their adrenaline's going to be pumping in the same way and like this and that. That's just not even realistic, But they actually did treat those scrims pretty like as well as they could.
Like, okay, no disrespect, but I've got to ask you this because this is a perfect litmus for this, okay? So obviously, when you were in the Echo Fox team, it was a team that had a lot of problems and it never really got it together to be a top team. If you played against like Luminosity or SK when you were in that team, was it a proper scrim?
Yeah, they actually tried to run real strats and we would beat them in scrims. I know that's like laughable.
Okay, no, fair
but
play.
Yeah. No, yeah, I specifically remember on Echo Fox we were trying out Ichiban. And we played them on Cobble, and we played them on another map. I think we beat them on Cobble, and we like tied them on another map or something like that. We're like, holy shit, dude, these guys are just like, I think they either just won the major or like maybe it was like a 2 months later or something like that. So it's like a pretty cool thing, that we had all these up and coming players and we were able to hang with SK, especially when I could feel them running strats. Like they were running strats on Cobble the entire time. But that's the thing is, yes, they act like those are LAN matches, but that's not how they play in LAN matches. Like they don't just run around and they're not super readable in these big games. They do a lot of mid gaming, and I think that's in large part due to the fact that when they play a lot of top teams, the battle from other teams to not allow them to play that style kind of prevents them from doing what they do in practice. Yeah. Which is weird, but that's why it's so hard for them to practice, right? It's because American teams can't disrupt them the way the top tier 1 European teams can disrupt them in matches. Sure. And I think that's why they spend a lot more time in theory, right? Like, well, what if a guy swung around this corner doing this and that? But yeah, they do take their scrum seriously.
Right. Okay, we've got a good one out of the way there in terms of Fallen. Who is the second name on the list here? Who are we going with number 2? So
I could go 2 ways with this, because in my eyes they're kind of similar. But I'm gonna go Karrigan, and I'm gonna snub Pronax out of this. It's kind of
it's controversial, depending on when people came from, what era. Snubbed the most decorated league of all time.
I think it's gonna upset some people.
Here's the thing, Sean. It will because to set it up, even though. Like, if you're in-game leader and you look at, like, Karrigan's record over the last year and then you remember in TSM, he's had a lot of fucking success, and you can't always, no matter how great a game you call, win the game. The players have to play at the end of the day. But at the moment, Karrigan gets a lot of the flack in FaZe, When they don't win, a lot of people think it's his fault or he didn't make the call when it was the big game or something. So what is it that appealed to you? Why did you pick him? And even over Pronax in this scenario?
Yeah, I think they're very similar in the fact that they've played with a lot of superstars in their careers.
Yes.
And they've managed the personalities really, really well in their team. Because I can tell you from experience, it is insanely difficult dealing with some star players, especially younger ones that like burst onto the scene, So I think what Karrigan has done with FaZe, and before that, like what he did when he joined Astralis, I thought they had a lot of success when he first joined their team. People don't remember the struggles they had leading up to him joining the team. They only remember the bad parts at the end when he was on the team. And same thing goes for FaZe. Like when he joined FaZe, I felt like they immediately had success. And he's done such a good job of making sure these players on his team, regardless of who they are, understand how to trade kills, understand, there's how to have proper spacing, while somehow giving players like, Nico and Rain, when Olaf was on the team, he gives these players freedoms. Like, and you've heard Astralis complain about that in the past is when Karrigan left, his style was too loose. They needed something more rigid. So he somehow managed to find consistency in this loose style, which is why I compared him a lot to Pronax, because I felt like Pronax had that same style. But when I watch Karrigan a lot of the times now, he has a lot of, much like actually how Pronax and after Pronax Flusha, when Flusha was in-game leading for Fnatic, they find really quirky grenades or like smoke grenades or something like that. And they use them to manipulate rotations like no one has ever seen, and it'll gimmick them an entire tournament on a map. It'll feel like, so that combined with the spacing and trading, I've seen a lot of good stuff with him out of Karrigan on Mirage. So I know his fundamentals on like rotations are pretty much like unprecedented. Like I can tell he's pushing and pulling rotations 24/7 on strats. So I had to include him on this list. I couldn't snub him out. And I actually think he's a great player. Like individually, I actually think he's a great player. It's just he takes all of the brunt and all of the shit spots in everything that he does.
Let me ask you then, let me pick up on one of these topics then. So the first thing you said about the fact that he's managed superstars, like what's funny is, there's going to be a theme with Karrigan, I think, but that's one of the weird ways in which people actually don't get credit when they're in-game leaders who win. So actually, you mentioned Pronax there. For people who don't remember his prime era and they only saw him now, they think, oh, it's just he had Olofmeister and Flusher and Crimson. So similarly, people will look at Karrigan and they'll say, well, you had Device and Dupree and KGB and then obviously all the people in FaZe, who some really amazing players. And obviously the last lineup they had with Olofmeister was even more ridiculous. It was like all the superstar names. Unfortunately, people will often think, well, isn't an in-game leader supposed to do tactics and lead the team? Well, wait a minute. If you're doing a loose style and you have superstar players, they almost want to be like, what are you doing, you know? But as you kind of touched on a bit there, what is it that's he is doing then? Like, what is he actually, what is his role within this? And also, you know, what are the difficulties of trying to manage a star player? Because again, to a naive fan, they may think, oh, it's cool. I just send him out and he kills everyone. But it's a bit more tricky than that.
No, it is. And you can see he's refined like a lot of the aggressive like tendencies of even someone like Guardian. If you watch Guardian, he does know when to play aggressive and when to not play, like when to go like passive on a map like Overpass. And I think it's because he's fallen into Karrigan's system really well. And same thing goes if you look at the inverse side of that map, Overpass. I know it's a map that they've struggled with a lot, but you'll see their trading coming up through connector is so on point. But like the actual sharp edge of that sword that they've fallen a lot is Overpass lends itself to like a lot of CT aggressions, and you'll see the maps they struggle on is the maps that they don't really have like a lot of structure and backup plans for that aggression. Like at the major, I think we saw Nico get picked a few times in water. Same thing goes for like Inferno, you know, like once teams start aggressing into them and doing things to like catch people off guard, that's when the loose style kind of breaks down, in my opinion, if you lose those initial fights. Because he's giving his players like Nico the chance to get those fights, which they wouldn't get if they were on an extremely structured team, like say like, I mean, like say like Astralis, like current day Astralis, you know, like you're not going to catch Zipix hanging out in the water on short B like you would catch Nico hanging out there. You know, like that's on purpose. Like Karrigan's allowing Nico to go there because he has faith that he'll have success there, you know, like more than 50% of the time if someone were to aggress into him. But, you know, like he could lose those fights and then you lose all eyes on that side of the map. You're blindside now going into the A bomb site that can be stacked there. It's a very different style. And honestly, like I've dabbled with it in the past. It's really hard. You have to have players that understand, you know, what every kill means. A lot like how Fallen probably taught SK that. Sure. Even more so with Karrigan, he would have to have all of his players understand, you know, what each frag means. If you get this pick, are you going to roll with it, or are you going to fall back and play passive? You know, like when should you regroup with your teammates? When should you not? Because there's not a lot of like visible like execute based tactics when you watch a team like that. But there is a shit ton of like things that they go over before a match goes live.
So, okay, then to tie into something you were saying there, another reason why it doesn't really work to say like, you know, if someone who has a loose style isn't doing much as the in-game leader is because something you touched on there is that it's not like loose means everyone just run around and I'll stand at the back and you kill everyone. As you kind of said there, he's having to sort of like read the game, and he is kind of telling like, okay, he gives them freedom. Say he gives someone freedom on Mirage to go up to middle to the connector. Okay, but then he makes a call as to what they do after that, right? It's like those calls on the fly. I mean, those are difficult at times, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, even further than that, like his mid gaming is really on point actually when you watch him. And you can even see that from when, you know, you watch him in that like 1-on-4 from a long time ago that is really famous, where he threw that smoke from like outside Palace on Mirage that goes into the B site to like draw people off. that's just him like understanding, you know, like this smoke going over here is going to pull or rotate, and then I'll plant the bomb A. Give me a better chance of winning the round. But his early round is really, really strong at making sure that his players have good fights. And then making sure the spacing as well. So whereas Astralis is like very flashy with utility, you might see someone like, if you watch FaZe play Mirage, you might see them throw like the stairs and connector smoke on A site Mirage, which will then pull the connector player away from connector. It'll pull the jungle player a little bit towards those smokes, towards the A site. And then you might see like 3 players take mid control almost for free, you know, like with no grenades. Whereas when you watch Astralis, you might see them actually, you know, utilize their utility to take mid by like throwing like a top mid smoke, a window smoke, this and that, like, and then getting 3 players out mid with that utility. Whereas Karrigan's like pushing and pulling rotations with his own grenades to give better fights, like gunfights. He wants gunfights in middle that favor, you know, a 3-on-1 or something like that, like in mid. So he favors getting those advantageous fights, whereas Astralis, when you watch them, they favor map control and like gaining ground and things like that. It's just a different type of ideology, I guess.
One thing that I've noticed personally, and from actually knowing Karrigan, is one of the in-game leaders I do talk to a bit, to tie into what you were, I'm trying to think what I'm referring to here, but it's basically the fact that, it's when you were saying about how he'll always have like a weird smoke or something, and sometimes that might just like, not just win a match, but maybe even help you win a tournament just on that one map, you know, before people get a chance to break it down and they've played against it a few times. This is another thing that I think used to be underrated about him, but if you notice, almost every team he is in either has a ridiculously good map pool, like they can play nearly all the maps, or if not, so for example, I'd say the current phase probably doesn't have like a super deep one, they can switch it up, you know, like they can pick, well, we're going to pivot now, so okay, we're not as good on Inferno, right, let's get super good on Cash. And again, for people who don't know, there's a reason why some teams who can be very good teams can only play, you know, 4 maps or something, or can't ever play one particular map and always ban that one. So what's that skill like? I mean, is it something that's been, just from your own perspective as an in-game leader, what do you think of that? The ability to kind of move around the map pool and switch up what you're doing, and sometimes maybe have a map for 2 months and then switch to another one completely.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely envy that he's able to do that with his team. I think it takes really skilled players that, you know, understand the fundamentals of Counter-Strike really well. And he teaches that. You can tell he teaches that because he did it with Astralis, and then he did it again with FaZe. When FaZe looked like kind of like a mess before he joined. You know, like everyone was...
Yes.
Like FaZe needs an in-game leader. FaZe needs it, and ever since they got one, they've been dominant. You know, like he's done such a good job with that team, right? Just instilling his system, which is basically, you know, making sure there's trading available in these situations, regardless of the map. You know, like he really teaches his teammates. It looks like when they should and when they shouldn't engage individually, which is hard when you have the talent that he's had. You know, like it's hard to tell, you know, a pit bull that's barking at you and off leash to stop and then have him just sit down, you know, right in front of you. But he's managed to do it on 2 different lineups with all his star talent, which is amazing. Like, honestly, that he's able to pull it off.
Okay. Who are we going to pick for the third name?
Okay, so this is where it gets a little bit dicey, all right?
Okay, so, we're going down a left turn here, are we?
Yeah. So I'm going to go with Zeus as the third guy. And that's not too shocking, right? Like, Zeus has had tons of success, even dating back to 1.6. You know that.
Yes.
So yes. I'm sure you can probably like F people up with some knowledge on some stuff that he's done since 1.6. The amount of tournaments this guy's probably won, or he maybe got second. And he's probably gotten second more than he's won, right? Feels that way lately.
CSGO especially, yes, he had a lot of second places.
Yeah.
Even the very good Navi was kind of always placing that. So as you say, though, this is another good example of the timing that you pick in it is what's going to make it interesting. Because, again, anyone who knows 1.6, I mean, the guy won 4 majors in a row. Like, that's pretty fucking good. And then you come to CSGO, and one of the reasons I always thought in CSGO he was originally actually underrated is if you remember the first Navi lineups in CSGO, after they had to transition from the 1.6 lineup, because, you know, some of the players weren't as good, and not every player could play CSGO. The first lineups actually were the ones that, like, weren't generally going to make it to the final. You know, they were sort of like maybe, I would have said like they were maybe like the 5th best team in the world or something. But that can actually be like an ideal spot to kind of show you if you're good in-game leader, because you don't have as good players. You've got to kind of like get like super good on a map, or you got to be able to know how to play a team that's better than you on a map. So when you think of Zeus in CS:GO, what are you thinking of? What kind of style, or what defines Zeus in his style of leadership, do you think?
So Zeus has always been the type of in-game leader that, how do I even explain this? Like, their utility usage is actually like super low for a top team. Like that, like even lower than I would say like a team like Fnatic, or, you know, we talked about like FaZe. Like you won't see any executes really when you watch Navi play Counter-Strike, or like when you watch Zeus lead a team. The one exception was, you know, that Gambit run at the major. Like they had a lot of like quirky little execs on train that they would run. But I mean, typically his trading on his teams is just so on point. Like they're really well tuned as far as like, I guess, how do I explain this? So moving around the map, they'll wait a lot. Like they'll wait out utility. They're really good at drawing out utility early by like faking aggression. And if you don't use utility, they're good at capitalizing on that, right? So, but they're doing it in like a dry manner.
Well, okay, maybe I can tie into this to give you something to boost off. But I remember when his team was at their best, like when they had Guardian and they were, you know, they were an amazing team. Yeah. One of the things everyone used to rave about was like the way they would take map control, because it's kind of like what you're saying here. What they would always do was they went super slow, and this is why I always used to tell fans when I was on the desk. I was like, that might look very easy. Like, yeah, of course, why don't we all just like slowly take over an area, like check every angle with both people so you can always trade, draw all the utility out, and then wait till 25 seconds, hit the site and take it over. It's like, the reason that doesn't work is because if you just do that and the team figures out you're doing it, they'll flank you, they'll play super far back, they won't throw the utility. It's really hard to trick people over and over to throw the utility, right?
Yeah, no, it's not as easy as it sounds, right? Like that's why I'm having a hard time describe it, because they do a lot of like false aggressions that'll draw out utility. And once they know that you like have no smokes or mollies and things like that, they'll take a little bit of map control from you in say like middle on Inferno or something like that. Or once they realize your smoke bottom B went up, they'll Molotov where the car was and they'll take banana control with like 2 or 3 people. And it ends up in this scenario every time when you play Navi where there's like 30 seconds left in the round, you have no smokes, you might have like 1 Molotov, and you have 2 people in the A site, 3 people in the B site, or I'm sorry, 3 people in the A site, 2 people in the B site on Inferno, and they have mid control and they have banana control. So like you end up in this scenario where you have nothing to slow them down. There's 30 seconds, and yeah, the round is going to be dicey for them, but it's going to be dicey as fuck for you too. Like they're going to trade these kills entering the site. Right. And if they go B, there's no way your third player is there in time to stop them. So it's like a 2-on-5 in the B site. If they go A, they're going to smoke off your arch player. It's going to be a 2-on-5 going up lane with like probably a lurk going up ramp. So that guy's going to probably flank through and, you know, get a third kill. And yeah, they don't win that round, you know, 60% of the time, but they will get 3 kills 100% of the time. And they'll keep running it. They'll keep running it and doing that same shit over and over. And unlike CT side, they can get away with it, and eventually they'll break your money and they'll walk away from the half, you know, with 7 rounds every single time. Whereas like, you know, when you watch Astralis, yeah, they might get those like 12 round halves on their T side, like consistently actually these days. But I guess Navi probably wouldn't ever have that consistent, you know, 12, 13 round T halves like ever. Like I don't think they'll ever have that. But then they will almost never get blanked out of a D half because of how they play. Yeah. Like it is very, very difficult to shut down Navi on an entire T half, because eventually you're going to find yourself in a situation where you have no money and you're going to be buying with like CZs. And yeah, if you win that round like cleanly somehow, like if you somehow manage to win that round, they're in a shithole situation. And that's when you typically see Navi like fall apart and look like blown out, is when they lose that round on their T half. But they do, in my eyes, Zeus has done a really good job of, you know, never changing from his style and always knowing, you know, that getting, you know, that middle amount of rounds on T side where he breaks the team's economy. And if he wins a T pistol, then yeah, he'll have a really good half actually on T side. And then having CT's like side set up for success with like support and never doing anything like overly aggressive and dying in certain spots where you can't trade kills. I really like that about Zeus's game style. And he shaped my game style in a lot because in 1.6, the person that taught me how to play CS was Ukrainian, a guy by the name of Naz Steno. I don't know if you remember Steno.
Of course, the legendary Steno.
Yeah, so Steno had like
he's a very methodical guy, right?
Very, very methodical. And he got his style from Navi, actually, because he was Ukrainian. Like, he has that Ukrainian pride thing going on. So, yeah, like I can honestly say that Zeus's calling style shaped a lot of how I call because Steno taught me how to play CS back in 1.6.
Okay, so a question I have about when you were describing like the map control style and the run the clock down style, which obviously is a very famous style from Navi. When you do this, what do you think is like the focal point or the strength of the in-game leader on that? Like, is it, for example, like as you say, when you have like B control and Inferno, but at the same time you're moving up to A, is it like the ability to make the read of when to do it? Which site to hit? Is it that you have to have everyone in your team know, for example, like where the exact utility has to go and then what angle to what? Which do you think is like the strength of the in-game leader expressed through that? Like, what's the key focal point you'd have to make it work?
See, I actually think among all of the in-game leaders that I'm going to list, I think Zeus has the most input in a given round based on his style. And I think that honestly, if you look at how much I talk when I play, it's probably in line with Zeus. Whereas like when you watch someone like Fallen and Karrigan, and even the fourth person I'm going to go over, they don't talk as much when you watch them play. Whereas if you watch someone like Zeus, he's just constantly like talking the entire time. You can tell like, and honestly, I have no idea what he's saying. Like, I wish I could get a translator other than like the couple VODs he's released. Yeah, it seems like he's just always talking in like an aggressive tone. I don't know. It's really weird.
I think that's just people from Eastern Europe in general. Yeah, they all seem to just be angry.
So. Dude, he seems real pissed. But so what he says, so say they're playing Inferno, right? And there's no nades taken in banana, where that's like top mid smoked. He will call to take banana like immediately. You know, like it's all reactive stuff. Or if say like they smoke bottom B double molly, he'll be like, let's get mid control as quick as possible. So he'll call his team to react to and take mid control. Say they do both, he'll be like, all right, let's get apps control. All right, let's get apps control once the mid smoke fades. Then we'll get mid control through apps and mid. You know, like he's always reacting like in the early game. And then the late game, in like the mid game, he's basically trying to figure out like what the setup of the other team is because he has no executes, right? So the whole time he's playing reactively to the other team. And say like he gets banana control, right? He might smoke CT spawn and banana at that point just to draw out a smoker molly of one of the B players. And then what that does is later on in the round, it makes a second guy come to B because the main guy B no longer has a smoker Molotov. Sure. He feels less confident because if a hit comes his way, he has no utility. He's just going to trade it out. So he's setting up things in the mid round by pulling out utility. He might tell someone to throw this, throw that, you know. And then the late game, he might do like one last fake to like pull a rotation and then do like a hit with like three people going up lane, one guy going up arch, like I said, one guy hauls. So say in this scenario, you know, late game, he might have whoever it is. I think it might be electronic that goes towards banana or it could be. I'm actually not sure who goes banana for them right now on like their T side and like stays there as a lurker. But yeah, he might have him like, you know, throw like a lurk smoke into B. And with like 30 seconds left, if you see that smoke, you might be forced to rotate from the like say like arch side of A site. You might lean a little bit towards CT spawn. And then he's calling like three people go up lane, one guy come hauls, and whoever threw that smoke at B, just run back and then go up the arch, you know, and you'll get a 1-on-1 at arch. We'll get a 4-on-2 going up lane and out hauls, and we'll trade these kills with like 20 seconds left. But he has a lot of impact throughout the round with, you know, the words that he says on his mic. Whereas the other players, in my opinion, they give their players, the other in-game leaders, give their players a lot of freedoms to, you know, make plays individually, or they'll have set tactics. You don't really see any of that stuff when you watch Navi, in my opinion. You might see a little bit lately, actually. lately, since their resurgence, actually, since they almost lost, it might be because they almost lost Simple and Flamey. Honestly, I don't know, but they do play a little bit differently now. And it's kind of refreshing to see them play that style. And we even saw them play Cash recently, which was kind of crazy. But that's one thing I do respect out of Zeus is that he's stuck to his style, and he's even stuck to the maps that he plays, which is crazy. Like, he's never even giving Cash a chance. It's like,
yes.
Like, that's kind of crazy, right? Like, am I crazy to think, like, why have you not tried Cash? Like, what?
I mean, if I had Simple in this form, I'd be like, let's give all the fucking skill maps a go. You know, turn this guy loose.
I don't get it. But he's just super confident in his style and the way he calls on all the maps. So, fuck it. Cash doesn't even exist to him.
Okay, I've got a good question actually that ties into all these in-game leaders, because the way you're describing like the things you like about what they're doing around and the style and kind of your input is this. So obviously a problem a fan has is he doesn't always know when he sees a round play out if that even was a strat, for example. Like sometimes he doesn't know, like, was that just a genius play from a player or was that actually something that was planned, you know? And so, unfortunately, a lot of people without the information are just going to take whether you won the round as to whether it was the right read and whether it was the right strategy and whether it was good, basically. Which, listen, to some degree, there's going to be some truth to that. But obviously, there can be scenarios where, I mean, I've seen Glaive do it before. I've seen him have like halves where he called like 9 amazing T rounds, but they only won 3 of them, you know, and then maybe they didn't have enough utility or they lost the 1v1 or whatever. So the point I'm getting to here is when you look at another in-game leader, obviously, a lot can happen with the individual players in a round. Like, you could call the perfect strat, but, you know, the CT's on the opposite side of the wall that you expect, and he shoots the first guy. You know, there's so many ways it could go wrong. So how do you kind of judge how well you think someone's doing it? Like, it sounds like it's the style you admire. Like, with Zeus there, I thought it was interesting where you said that it doesn't matter that you might not win 12 T rounds. Like, the style kind of, it has like sort of a weird insurance built into it where you'll always get a certain amount of opportunities and a certain amount of, like, it sounds like a good grinding style in a way, right? So what is it that you're seeing that you like? Because it can't just be that they win the game.
Yeah, I think like the biggest negative for like any in-game leader is if people are just getting picked off without trades in sight. You know, like if that's happening left and right. Like I recently did a video about SK, like their struggles on like Mirage. I just looked at Mirage and I looked at their 3 matches that they put on Mirage on LAN lately. And yeah, they're just getting picked off everywhere. Like they're getting picked off A ramp, B apps, they're being picked off top, mid, underpass, palace, everywhere. Like everywhere they're getting picked off. And that is just, I don't even know like how to say that, you know, like what they're doing wrong.
Like, does that feel like it's hard to know if it's in-game later? Like that could just be individual mistakes or people playing badly.
Yeah, like that's what I was trying to get across in my video is like, honestly, like they know that they have to know that this is a problem. Like they have to know this is a problem. They have to address this at this point. And like honestly, even if they were to put the same players were the same pushes against SK 100 more times, they're not going to win those pushes. Like the amount of times that they've won them in these 4 matches that I've watched, like these are still skilled players on SK, you know, like they're going to win these fights eventually. Like eventually things are going to start going their way because I mean, they're just losing 1v1 duels early round. But at the same time, like if you watch people like way out of place get picked off, you can understand that that person doesn't really understand the concept of, you know, like what they should be doing. Or if you watch people in like mid rounds not use utility to support their teammates, you can tell that the in-game leader doesn't really have as much, I guess, influence over that team as they'd like, probably, assuming that the in-game leader expresses the importance of that, which they probably do. So a lot of times when you watch tier 2 players, you know, like you'll see people like sit on flashes on CT side, or they'll like be supporting on T rounds, like running in places 2nd or 3rd. And these are usually like the star players in NA, right? But they'll have full set of utility. And you'll be like, what the fuck is this guy doing? Like, why is he not throwing flashes for his teammate? Like he could have used this utility early round, at very least, you know, but like those teams that function like that are typically the ones, in my opinion, that have a lot of problems. And honestly, it's hard to even put that blame on the in-game leader because the in-game leader might tell that person that, and it just takes, you know, experience for that person to learn over time, and, you know, a lot of demo reviews and looking at pro teams. but it is hard to get across to some young players. But I would say that those two things are the biggest tells: is lack of utility usage and not being in places where you can't trade effectively, but yet still taking aggressions.
Who is the last name of the four going to be? This is obviously, if you, in line with what I've said earlier, it's going to be some, again, a little bit funky, right?
Yeah, so honestly, I didn't want to put this fourth guy on this list, but you made me, Duncan. You made me do this. You said this is the only way that I will ever be able to come on your podcast. Yeah. So the fourth player is MSL. Everyone, hold your stop.
I actually breath right now. Wait a minute. But if Sean says it, now I have to think he's good. Everyone's getting ready. Everyone's like ready. It's like going to church. They're ready to just hear all the brainwashing Sean. So listen, here's the thing. Karrigan, okay, he gets some of the blame when FaZe lose. Zeus, okay, when Simple was amazing, yes, some people were shitting on him. MSL, you got your work cut out for you on this one. So just give us the initial thoughts. Like, what? For a start off, he's not someone who's won as much as those other players on the list, right? No. So what stands out about MSL?
So what stands out about MSL is just I wanted to have someone that is different than the other three. And also, I mean, the payment that I'm getting from you for this is just I had to try to I'm just kidding. But no, he is very different than the other three in the aspect of he's had a lot of inexperienced players on his teams. And I can respect that, right? Like since Cloud9, I've had a lot of inexperienced players on my team. Yes. And something that I learned at the end of Misfits, when I was looking at demos of North before we played them at EPL on Cobble, was just how structured North was strategically. Like, it really took me to look at them over like 2 tournaments back to back, like look at all their demos across every map, and just seeing how every single round they have a set strat on T side, and almost every single gun round on CT side they have a way to get an opening. Like there's no freedom when you watch a team like North play. And you might say like, well, he has players like this player and that player, like Config was on his team, and this player was on his team, right? Like, why the fuck are there no individual freedoms? But I can tell you after playing with inexperienced players is you almost have to do that if you want to succeed. Like, that's why a lot of times when you see a team like, FaZe incorporate someone young like Nico, they have a lot of experienced players to go around someone like Nico. It's like, it's not like there's 5 Nicos on that team when Nico is like, 19 years old. Like, there's a lot of experienced players basically honing his styling. Like, he can be aggressive because he has 4 pillars around him that are playing consistent Counter-Strike, right? And MSL hasn't really had much of that. Honestly, like, what was like that dominant North lineup that won Epicenter? Who was on that?
That was the one where he had Cajun and Megas, Cajun and Rubino was the fourth.
Okay. Yeah, so like there's a lot of young players actually on that roster other than like Cajun. I don't know how old Rubino is.
I think I would guess like 23, 22. I think probably like in the middle,
So he's still fairly young, and I mean he didn't have that much experience.
Wasn't that experience, no.
He was a huge part to their team. I think losing him played like a big part because then it always ended up in that scenario where like the young players like outweighed the experienced players. And it got in that scenario with me several times in my career since Cloud9 where, you want to play. Like my style is a lot like the first 3 players on this list. But if you watch the way I called on Misfits at the end of that year, I was calling like MSL, which is not my style of calling. But, it got to a point where I couldn't trust how we'd play in like mid-game or late-game scenarios. Like we just kept dying to rotations in ways where trades weren't available. It didn't matter the map, right? Like anyone that's on a team that isn't, like in tier 1 can understand this. Like, especially if you're an in-game leader that understands rotations, is things don't go the way you think they're going to go, no matter how many times you go over them, right? Like, and it didn't matter how many demo reviews we did or how many times I would explain rotations on like Mirage. If something was wrong, so I ended up having to veto Mirage. Like we just veto Mirage, which is a map I love playing. Like you can push and pull rotations on Mirage so well, right? Like if everyone like understands rotations and how to move around the map, you can. But eventually got to a point where like the things we did got a little bit stale. So then we started playing a lot of like maps that we just didn't even play a lot of at the time, like Cobble and Overpass. And when I was doing anti-strat work before we played North at EPL, I noticed something that MSL did on Cobble was, he had set strats that he called every round. So he had like an instant B exec, he had an instant B plat creep where he'd like creep into, they'd throw like a pot flash, they'd jump out B plat. They had a quick drop explosion where they'd go drop an upper B together and they'd pinch the B site. They had a fast mid rush where they'd run up mid within the first like 10 seconds of the round. They had a fast like A default where they'd instantly run through A halls and up mid and just scale up the A site. And all 5 of those strats all occur within the first 20 seconds of the round. So here I am like anti-strat, I'm like, holy shit, dude, like, how can you counter this when, he might choose one of these 5 strats, like they're out of a hat, like they all occur within the same time frame of the round and they're all 5 in different areas of the map. It's very rare that you watch a team and they have something like that. Like it is very rare. I've watched tons of demos and I can honestly tell you that honestly, North might be the only one that I've ever watched on any map have fast hits at every single location of a map at the same exact time, so that way you can't counter-strat them. Like it's different when you watch a team like Fnatic and they just play loose everywhere and like shit could just happen. Like that's not strats. Like that's just like them understanding rotations, them understanding if they get this pick, this is what it means, and they have really experienced players and like they can maneuver around their map and get map control after those initial engagements. No, this is like actually fast strats that, yes, if there was only 3 of them, you can anti-strat them like really, really easily. But they had 5 across the entire map. So I really like that aspect of his game style. And what I did at EPL when I was watching these like before we were boot camping, so I was like, holy shit, dude, like this is how he masked the fact that his team can't mid game. Like I don't know if that's something that I don't know if MSL just doesn't respect the aspect of mid game. That could be a thing. Or you could just be like hiding the fact that his players are inexperienced.
For someone who hears the term and they're not quite sure what you mean, essentially we're talking about like after you've done the initial setup and you've taken whatever first part you want, you might have to transition, right? You either don't hit the site or you say something happens in the middle before you get to the end of the round where there's 2 people alive and someone's got a bomb dancer. So how do you define that just quickly?
Yeah, so like say we're playing like Mirage and we do like a default, right? And like I said, like we get like a kill on the window guy, like the opper that plays window. Like, well, a lot of teams at that point will like push and pull rotations around. Like they might do like a B fake where like they'll make sure they get like B apps control. Like they might molly the balcony at B like immediately at that point. So that basically the B guy gets no info. So the cat guy is probably going to stay by B, right? Because you could come up cat and your B player can't look down apps to know that no one's going to be B. So you force 2 people to play B and then you go A. Like that's something very, very simple, right? Like that's something super simple. You'll have a 2-on-5 at the A site for sure. Like 100%, you'll for sure have that 5-on-2 at the A site if you do what I just said. But when you watch a team like MSL's teams play, they lack that aspect of mid game a lot of times, and that's where they struggle, in my opinion. And I don't know if that's just because he has inexperienced players, because I've struggled to teach things like that to the inexperienced players that I played with. With that being said, we learned a lot towards the end on Misfits. But by doing fast strats all the time, like the way that Misfits did at EPL and the way that North played, I haven't really been watching them much lately. They've been struggling a lot. But it masks a lot of those deficiencies, a lot of like the quick thinking essentials that a tier 1 team and tier 1 players require to like be consistently really good. I don't know. So that's kind of my thoughts on MSL. I don't know what your thoughts are.
Well, what about this then? Because when you say these 2 different aspects, so one is like having a big playbook, basically, like we've got all the strats and crucially everyone knows them all, they all know exactly their role in it, etc. I mean, I would say one thing I thought that was very telling was when this recent scenario happened with Optic, when they had Config and Cajun, who obviously just came from North, and obviously Config came up as a star player under MSL. When they were playing under Shazam, one of the things I heard was that actually one of the complaints from the Danish players was that Stanislaw was like too loose and that they wanted him to sort of tell them, well, where do I go now? And, because in a way, this is something I often try to explain to people about why it's like the really great in-game leaders who do the tactics, they're not just like writing something out on a piece of paper with X's and O's and going, right, just go there. It's like you have to sort of explain to that guy why he's going to go there. And then crucially, if you do it and it fucks up, he can come back to you and be like, well, you told me to do that. You know, like the responsibility's back on you again. Whereas the kidding, if it's loose, I mean, I could always just go, well, I called the right basic mid round, you know, like, well, why didn't you kill him when you went, you know, it's in a way, it's like you're taking on a lot of responsibility to do this, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Like that's exactly right. And yeah, I think that's why, you know, those Danish players struggled with Stanislaw and Shazam, is because they suddenly had all these freedoms and they had to play by rotations and understanding, you know, like where people are moving around the map a lot more. And I mean, honestly, it kind of bogs you down when you have to think about all that stuff instead of just like doing exactly what you went over in practice, exactly like you've always done. You know, like if you have a bunch of set things, you don't really have, it takes the aspect of thinking out of the play. Like, right, you're just aiming around your crosshair. Like this is where you pre-aim your crosshair. Like this is what you're clearing at this time, and then this time, and then your teammate behind you is going to flash for you here. Yeah, you're not thinking all the time. Like, you're just mindlessly doing things like a robot almost, which is actually very effective. Like I made that sound pretty harsh, yes. But yeah, it's like a really good way to play CS actually, and MSL's proved that. But he ended up in a scenario now. I'm actually not sure why North is struggling so much now. It's kind of crazy to me.
Well, okay, on those lines though, when you were talking about this, how at the beginning about how different he is from everyone. Well, that's one of the things, obviously, especially I would say, like, for me, the moment that it all changed was when they had that, the first Fnatic lineup that had Olaf Meister, and at the exact same time was when they made the LDLC lineup with HawpT and Shox and MBK, because both these squads, as you addressed earlier, were teams that played like a loose style, and they obviously had a load of veteran players, and they really did have enough players in the different roles where, you know, like you can tell sometimes a player's making the decision, and that it's, you know, it's like, basically it's like sort of like a star player's dream team to play, and that's what they all want in those teams. Yeah. But it's so different from the old school way of Counter-Strike where, you know, the in-game leader calls all the strat and controls everything. And so ever since then, because those teams, if you think about how successful they were fabulously successful. And then when we mentioned coming into Karrigan's teams and coming into the Fallen SK teams, again, very successful teams that figure out a way to let the star players play. So in a way, MSL is kind of like a relic of the past, right? He's kind of it's the classic playbook style. So why does that still work then? Why is that not completely outdated, or is it to a degree? Does it work and does it not?
No, I think it does work. So the thing about it now, though, is people are so good at using utility on CT side that style is very, very difficult, because you would, like, now when you think about those early round hits, you're like, well, what the fuck is stopping us from getting like Molotoved in the first like 3 seconds of the round? Or like, you know, like when we throw these smokes, they're not just going to like double nade us if they're Astralis, and they will. Like, that's the thing, is like these top tier 1 teams now have learned how to counter like all of this bullshit. So that's why you see teams playing like more and more loose, is, you know, to counter that utility usage. But if you're someone like MSL now, you have to take it like a step deeper, right? Like, you can still have your set strats. Like, you still do all of this shit. You just have to make it deeper. Like, you have to go deeper into the fucking, what's that movie called? I don't even know. Inception. Yeah, there you go. Reading my mind. But yeah, so like you have to account for all of that utility now, you know, like, and maybe draw it out a little bit longer. Like, you throw like a fake rush in at B, you wait like 20 seconds, you throw a fake like rush into mid, and then you go back B with like your exec late in the round. But it's all choreographed. Like, this is all stuff you've gone over, and that's how you would get that style to work. Whereas, you know, the days of just, you know, dry rushing B or something like that, those are really, really hard to win. That's such a low percentage round on like any map in tier one Counter-Strike. And same thing goes for executes, like straight up executes. If you watch a team go into like a straight up exec on Mirage, if they just play it like by the book, like how it used to be played, where, you know, you plant the bomb, you like go back to Tetris, you go back to A ramp, you go back to sandwich, you go back to like under balk, and you just try to like win that 5-on-5 post fight, you're going to lose it. Like, you're going to lose it way more than 50% of the time. So that's why you watch teams like Astralis, they'll run like 2 guys back around into mid and stuff. They'll do like all kind of crazy shit. Like post-plant, they'll push spawn like through the smoke with a flash. They'll push jungle like through the connector smoke. And And that's what I mean by like, taking it a step deeper, right? Like there needs to be an extra layer to those executes at this point in order to beat the utility usage from counter terrorists.
Okay. Another aspect I thought on that we could pick up on is when I was asking, like, you know, does it work, doesn't it? Like, one thing I will say is, obviously people know I'm an admirer of this style of play traditionally in Counter-Strike because it is the original great way to play tactical Counter-Strike. And I'm actually kind of like, I'm with you in as much as I'm quite impressed that you can even make it work in the modern day. Like, you know, when you're playing against teams like FaZe that have like unbelievable players on CT side, it's going to break down a lot of the times on the strats. But as you're saying, you got to kind of have like variants of them, you know, like if this is not working, I've got like a slightly tweaked version of it that's still a strat. But here's the one thing I'll say as a flaw. It's not really necessarily a flaw in MSL, it's just a flaw in that style, I think. Because, okay, I'll tell you a story that I heard about existence in the early days of CSGO, which is one of the reasons, supposedly, like over the years, like gradually, more and more the top French players like decided they didn't want to do the existence style, was he did this level of like planning. Like he used to literally just go super in depth and have like every possible variant and try and map out everything that could happen and what you would do if that would happen and what the change was. And the problem they said is that when you did that, it was impossible to have like the deepest map pool. You would always have like you'd have like 3, maybe 4 that you were like, and in those 3 or 4, like 2 you might be like the best in the world on, and another 2 you might be really good on. But they said the problem was because you were putting in so much effort and time on those ones, you could never go sort of like the full map pool and be able to pick anything. And so in a way it made you a little bit more set. And I will say from a lot of MSL's teams, this is where it might sound weird because in a pick ban veto section, okay, I can only judge you on what maps I think you're good on and what I think the opponent will win on. So it will always sound like I'm shit talking MSL because he always seems very stubborn in the pick ban. But I actually know from talking to him, it's kind of like this because if he really thinks and he's putting massive amount of hours on Mirage and Overpass, it doesn't matter that he's playing against FaZe Clan and those are like their 2 best maps at this point in time. In his mind, he's thinking, well, I've watched the demos. In a weird way, I know because they're the best maps that they're going to let me pick one of those maps. And I'm just going to go, okay, I've watched their demos. I know roughly what they want to do. And here's like my 8 best strats that I could do. So it's definitely like, it can sound like a flaw because it definitely can have its limitations, but it's just kind of a different way of thinking in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I've actually had that thought process too, right? Like where you're hindered by your map pool a little bit because you're calling so rigid, and it goes back to like what we said about Karrigan, right? Like he has this style that's loose that can literally translate to almost any map because it's just about the fundamentals of trading and spacing and understanding like who can and who can't take engagements in certain areas. When you're going to get aggressive, he teaches his players, you know, how to play on the fly and like use utility for his teammates, when to ask for flashes, when to ask for grenades and things like that. So a lot of things don't get wasted. But when you play that rigid style, it's hard to implement that like immediately into new maps. And like, it's literally like reinventing the wheel on like every single map, right? Like that's why, you know, when Cobble got taken out of the pool, dude, that had to hurt for North,
yes,
like more than almost any team because they were such a good
team coming in to replace it.
Yeah, like they got cooked real hard.
That was bad.
Yeah, that was rough. Yeah, because like they're a team that really can't afford something like that based on how they play.
I thought an interesting point, maybe to wrap it up then, was you made a really interesting point, especially with the order you picked them in, by saying at the end that like the first 3 obviously are famous in different respects by being people who, you know, they have like obviously the first 2 very loose styles, but fabulous success. Zeus, I would just say a very unique style, you know, a very unusual style of how he does it, but again, with interesting aspects built into it. But again, it's not like he's calling a straight execute. In fact, it's the opposite. He's running the clock down. He's trying to read the map. He's trying to get everyone positioned. At the end, he sort of calls like the pounce, basically. It's like the last part of a strat almost. Yeah. In the case of MSL, though, like you said, you'd love on Misfits if you could have played all those other styles. But to do so, the luxury that those players have is like veteran players, someone that maybe sometimes even someone they've played with for 3 years, and then therefore he knows exactly what he's doing. In fact, this is one of the reasons why I often say the most underrated player in terms of like, if you talk about like a support or supportive player, is the guy where they've been with the in-game leader a long time. So they kind of know what he wants to do and they can kind of like meet him halfway and help him a bit. Because when you have the lesser players, sometimes you have to run some strats, right? You can't just turn a player who doesn't know what he's doing loose and say, go and do this, because even if somehow he pulled it off, how would you know what he's going to do?
Yeah, exactly. Like that's why I thought, you know, FaZe getting Olaf and actually like FaZe losing Olaf would be like the birth and the death of FaZe. Like I thought Olaf was such a huge pickup because of his influence and like the way he gets map control on CT side, and like how much he dictates like what a team does in a given round, his knowledge about like rotations, how important he was to Fnatic's success. He brought that into FaZe to help out Karrigan. And then when he left, I actually thought FaZe would, take like a massive step back. I would have never, ever imagined them winning Sydney the way they did. Like, that was shocking to me that they won that final.
To be fair, even when they won it, though, if you remember early in that tournament, like, they almost lost to the fucking Greyhound team as well. Like, they definitely had their ups and downs.
Yeah, but I think that's like, in my eyes, like, that cements Karrigan on this list, that he was able to pull out that best of 5 win in that finals, because he probably put in so much work, like the night before when he realized he had to play Astralis. Like, he probably busted his ass, and same with Robin. Like, I don't really know. And that's the thing with like all of these in-game leaders is I don't think, do any of these in-game leaders have they ever had a coach that like called strats a lot? I guess Zeus had Starks for a little bit, right? Like a split second.
Yes, actually for a while. Well, especially in the case of Starks, apparently he actually was the strat caller at one point in time. But that was that like brief, like 9 months where you could be the in-game leader as a coach. Whereas obviously other periods, like obviously I know Zeus, the one EWS with Fallen was just like, as far as I know, just a coach. I don't think he ever called stuff because I think Fallen was doing that mainly. And then Karrigan, as far as I know, I don't think that's like Robin's role, really. I think he's more like
I don't think so either.
The Zonic, like emotional support type guy or whatever, and maybe like a second set of eyes, give you some sort of feedback. Yeah, I think in general they haven't really. Yeah. But that's the other thing you always wonder about, though, right? Is like it's tough to know because you'd have to interview them, but I always do wonder which of them has the coach who, when they do the timeout, can actually give them like a proper like a conference of the minds, so it's not just in-game leader still like talking with 2 minutes extra, but it's actually someone who can say, I've been looking at this and, maybe look at, because that would definitely be a game changer.
Oh, for sure. But I also think that there's an aspect of like these, I don't think it's any coincidence, the 4 I chose that are most influential to me. And I probably snubbed a couple of people out like Glaive and Pronex that probably could have been in this list. But they all don't have someone, that would butt heads with them or make, their teammates defer judgment in any regard to the coach. It's always one of these 4 people in control of how their team functions. I guess Fallen kind of recently let Cold Zero call strats, and I know that Cold Zero has called strats in overtime before. He's told me in the past that he actually is the one that calls overtime strats, which is shocking because SK's success rate in those like close nitty games, it makes you think that like Cold Zero is actually like a great in-game leader. When he told me that, I was like, holy fuck, dude, you've been calling all of those OTs this whole time. But I think it's really important to have 100% trust and faith in your in-game leader, and having someone like that was like a problem when Peacemaker joined Misfits. Is like, quickly I realized like this is going to be a disaster, like based on how things have gone so far. Because
well, on that topic then, maybe the way I could ask you to set it up then is, right, to an outsider that might sound like a great thing to have someone else who has a vision for the game and stuff, but one of the things I notice about these 4 people you've listed is they are all people who have their own vision of the game, and their aim is get my team to follow that vision as closely as possible. Now, listen, if that means you lose, then they're going to take the blame. But like, you want to know that you did your plan, right? If you're the in-game leader.
Yeah, exactly. And I think like human nature is, right. Like if you have 2 people, I mean, eventually, if you have a coach that's super aggressive and direct and like has his own theories about the game, and they butt heads with you as the in-game leader. Like, what if like 3 of your teammates side with the coach at that? That's like the first straw, Eventually they're going to start siding with more and more things with the coach, and that stuff's going to build in their heads. They're going to have more doubts about you and the things you call. They're not going to trust you. Like, that's just human nature, in my opinion, when things start going wrong. And you don't really want that around. And something that can be said about all 4 of these guys is that they've been on teams for a long time. Zeus had that stint in Gambit, but even before that, like he was on Navi for a long time. MSL has been on this North team through like so many iterations. Karrigan's really only like hopped around like a couple teams. Yeah, and Fallen's pretty much stuck with the same core. But I don't know if that would be possible if they had coaches that were like super, super influential.
This video was made possible by Dean Tanglis, Sanity, Gman, Andreas, Snazore, Westerlund, Alex Adams, Mikkel Hansen, Jerky's Minion, Anthony, Bash, Daniel Yordanov, Yordan Tsenkov, TTMXMP, VeXii, HawpT, Travis T. Greb. Just like my man, a lot of people think you can't tell me nothing, but I've graduated from that mindset. And now it is possible to have influence over some of the people I have on my shows, some of the topics I cover, to ask me questions directly and get exclusive teasers for upcoming projects I'm working on. Unlock the code to the streets and join the Scrilluminati today at the Patreon link below.